if culture is the thing that happens when people start interacting and the ways that they interact over time that kind of forms into the practices and the norms, etc., we create the spaces where the things that come out in that way are just, fun and engaging and actually lead to new ideas and startups and projects and all of that stuff.
This is a transmission from the future, from a civilization that crossed the threshold into optimal life. The path to Utopia was messy, full of experiments, failures, and flashes of insight. These are fragments from that journey, conversations with the thinkers and builders who reimagined how we live, connect, and evolve. Welcome to Utopia in Beta. Paradise began as a prototype.
Hello and welcome to the Utopia in Beta podcast. I am your host, Isabel Castro, and today I'm joined by Timour Kosters, co-founder of Edge City. How are you doing today, Timour?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I feel like Edge operates such a unique position in the network state movement. So I'm keen to go into some of the themes I feel it touches on within its creation. But to begin with, maybe we start with a bit about you and your journey to network states and how you came to be where you are today.
Definitely, yeah. So just very brief background. I kind of, math and economics by academic background, spent about 8 years in New York building startups. And then I was running a VC fund called Seed Club Ventures. And while I was there, I was invited to an event called Zuzalu that was kind of an origination point, I think, for a lot of this, at least the current state of the movement. And the idea behind Zuzalu was essentially, it was started by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum. And the idea was basically that, at that time, which was kind of late 2022, early 2023, there were a lot of ideas around in this kind of ideological milieu, obviously the network state book had just come out and, some of those ideas had been around for decades. But basically Vitalik's insight was that nothing was actually happening. There were no real experiments being run. And he decided to essentially plant a flag and run one of those. And I got involved because essentially the way it worked was that Vitalik had this idea. He shared it with a few folks. Those folks shared it with a few other folks. And then they picked, I think it was 10 or 20 inviters who would be, inviting their communities and trying to keep it, somewhat diverse in terms of the ideological areas that people were coming from. And I happened to essentially, someone got in touch with me and said, hey, this thing's happening. By the way, they're looking for someone to run the AI track. Would you be interested? And I was, at the fund that I mentioned, we had just made a big investment into a company called Stability AI, which is a big AI hit. And at the time, and we, I guess from that had some kind of legitimacy. I mean, this was early on AI. Early on in the current wave of AI, let's say. So it was just as ChatGPT was coming out. So that's how I got involved. And at the time, I had read the book, the network state book, and I was definitely interested in concepts like this. But I think it took that experience of actually being there and, just having the lived experience of it for me to really understand why this kind of stuff is so interesting and so important. So potentially could be important. So that's been my journey so far.
Okay.
Sorry, that was my initial journey, and then I can touch on how we got to Edge.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like you to kind of expand on the point that you just made about why these things are important. Why do you think network states are important, and how has that informed your journey into creating Edge?
Yeah. So I think that, so first of all, network states are like a very broad set of ideas, I think. And like all good movements, they start to experience some semantic drift. Like, I worked in DAOs for a long time or for some time. And after a few years, no one really knew what anyone meant by the word DAO anymore. And I feel like something like that's happening with the network state, quote unquote, movement. But I think within that, there are some really interesting early glimmers of importance. And I think for me, the long run vision that's very compelling is this idea of international groups of people that transcend national borders, who have a sense of collective agency and collective purpose, and then use kind of the latest sets of technological tools and kind of culture, which I'm sure we'll talk about, to push those ideas forward. And the reason I think these things are so important is that in the same way that blockchains offer experimentation ground for new incentives models and economies and financial systems, I think that network societies, network states, network cities, pick your nomenclature, offer experimentation grounds for kind of new societal constructs. Like, how do we learn? How do we teach our kids? How do we teach ourselves? How do we govern the communities we live in? Is it actually possible to create communities that transcend national boundaries, but also are actually sources of belonging for people, like things that people actually feel that they're a part of and maybe eventually feel more kinship with than where they happen to be born, So I think that in general, my posture towards this is that more experimentation is good. Vitalik had an interesting post recently about, I think it was called Let 1,000 Societies Bloom. And he talks about kind of a common, common criticism, maybe, let's say, that experiments like this and, like network states and other more like libertarian leaning experiments get, is that it's just like a bunch of rich people playing around, like billionaires trying to create their own little utopias. And I actually agree with him. And I think a lot of those criticisms are valid. And there are a lot of, honestly, let's just say, different people and different perspectives in this space. But his point was basically like, maybe that's actually good, because otherwise what those people are going to realize is, wait, instead of doing that, we can just take the reins of power in like the United States, for example, and you see kind of rising authoritarianism and things like that kind of around the world. And his point was like, actually, we should just have much more experimentation in these fields. And that's why I think the network state movement is kind of like almost like a meme that you can base those things around. It's like a set of ideas that you can go to people and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do and this is why. So, come and check it out. And I think that's, quite important.
Yeah, for sure. I think with Edge, one of the things that stood out to me I haven't stayed there for kind of weeks yet, which I need to do. But one of the things that did stand out to me in the two kind of couple of days that I was in Edge was this focus on collaboration between a diversity of different sectors. You've got the kind of artists working alongside kind of technologists, and then you've got some kind of interrogation of the philosophical elements. I remember the one in the Edge in Austin, I sat in on a philosophical debate about truth in the time of AI, which was like really exciting. It's like shaped a lot of my kind of worldview around AI. But yeah, so with this diversity of different disciplines, how far and to what extent do you think that shapes the culture and goes into creating a culture that could create a long-term society?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think that, like, when I think about culture, I think about kind of the practices and the norms and the ways that people relate to each other in community. And we see a lot of these things emerge quite naturally. And we actually optimize the experience for emergence. So we want to create an environment where lots of interesting things kind of bubble up from the ground up. We don't want to be very authoritarian in the way that we organize our events. We want things to, happen naturally and kind of see what novel phenomena come out of that. And that's a very, specific design decision that we make. And we also do optimize for kind of multidisciplinarity, like you're mentioning. So we have people from all different fields, different walks of life, different ages, et cetera. So there's a lot of new ideas, a lot of different perspectives, let's say, or the potential for a lot of different perspectives. And then the trick as an organizer is kind of to create an environment that allows for those things to be expressed, right? Because if it's just a conference, it doesn't really matter if you have a ton of amazing different perspectives in the room. If there's just like one keynote after another, maybe people are going to meet, by the snack cart, but it doesn't allow for the collision of ideas, So that's something we think about a lot. And we have, again, like events that focus on emergence. And so there's not so much kind of big keynote programming. It's much more about various forms of groups that form kind of naturally and are, almost fractal versions of the bigger community because they reflect all of the, the diversity and the plurality that's in there. How does it impact the culture? I mean, something I think about a lot is how you could take, the same group of, let's say, a dozen people, and if you put them into one context, let's say in the middle of the forest, they're going to have very different interactions than if they are in, I don't know, like a massive conference hall or something. And they'll, again, have different interactions than if they're at network school, as if they're at Edge City, et cetera, et cetera. So we think a lot about this kind of container idea, like what is the container that people are in and what sides of themselves and like what group dynamics can be created within that. And so there's a very long way of answering your question, but I'm finally coming to the climax, which is basically if culture is the thing that happens when people start interacting and the ways that they interact over time that kind of forms into the practices and the norms, etc., then we create the spaces where the things that come out in that way are just, fun and engaging and actually lead to new ideas and startups and projects and all of that stuff. So that's how I would link those ideas of like the multidisciplinarity and the culture that emerges. But I haven't had to do that before, so maybe that's a little jumble. But it's a good question because it's not. I don't have like a cached answer to it. I have to like think on the spot. So yeah, good job.
I think this is the thing with Edge. I feel like each kind of experimental society that is in the network state movement, they each kind of, and I'll go into this and ask you your thoughts about it in a bit later, but they each kind of play their role in surfacing new ideas and things that people in the movement can collaborate on and like learn from each other and try and integrate that. And I feel like Edge for me has been one that focuses on kind of diversity and culture. So it was kind of through that I was like, oh, why are they existing in the same for want of a better word, product or society, you know. I'm curious though, on top of that, through your experimentation, do you have any kind of core tenets that have emerged that go towards the creation of the culture that you kind of foster in the Edge events?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it's a good question. And just to touch on the point you just made right before that, I think that's right. Like, I do think all of these different communities will each play their own role. And that's actually a really good thing. It's actually an amazing thing that different, groups will have very different vibes, and they will cultivate their own vibe over time that will crystallize into a culture that will really appeal to some people and probably not appeal to others. I'm sure there are folks that come to Edge and they're just like, it's not my thing. I'd rather be at, something else. There are people that go to other events and then they come to Edge and they tell us like, wow, I feel so good here. Thank goodness, I'm so happy to be here. And what's cool is that there's kind of this idea of like, how in Silicon Valley, for example, a large part of why people think it's so successful is that there is so much movement of key employees between different companies. And so trade secrets or kind of like ways of practice are actually quite liquid, and everyone upgrades every time. Like over time, this results in just a general upgrading of the level of quality of operations, because someone, works at one company, tries a bunch of different stuff, learns the best practices, moves to another one, teaches everyone there, etc., and vice versa. I think there's something like that with the various network states where I've gone to visit a bunch. We have community members who we very much share in common, people who are at a bunch of them. And there's a very liquid thing of like, oh, this is how they're doing their, ticketing points or their like morning check-ins or whatever. So I think that's actually like a really good, healthy thing. To answer your question, so in terms of kind of tenets that have arrived to us over time, again, we tried to be super hands off with this kind of thing, but as often happens with new communities or companies or really organizations of any kind, over time you realize that maybe, there's space to have a bit of like a values definition exercise or something, or just start to imbue some principles, because you don't want to be completely unopinionated, because then it just feels a little lacking in direction. So essentially what we've done thus far is we've landed on 4 key principles for the villages themselves. And those have served us really well, and they inform the way that we organize them, but they also serve as kind of a signaling thing where people read them and then they self-select into the community because they're into it, or maybe they're not. So one that we've already talked about is multidisciplinarity. So, we have people from AI, from crypto, from biotech, from science, from things nothing to do with tech and science, like music and art and culture, etc. And I think the key insight is that we're trying to build the precursor for what Brian Eno would call a scenius, kind of a collective genius or the genius of a scene. And that happens from the proximity of, high agency people who are, enjoying life together. They might have very different opinions, but they find a lot of joy in spending time with each other. And that often leads to like constructive energy. Then the second principle we have is focus on co-creation. So we basically don't want to ever be the ones who are, say, again, like top down, saying exactly how the experience should be. Over 90% of the sessions that happen at Edge are not organized by us or someone that we, nominate. So it's very much a co-created experience. This sounds like, we're kind of opting out, but it actually takes a lot of work to organize for, because you have to set up the structures in a way that it can be very self-serve. Like how do you set up the venue so that anyone can come, they can put a session on the shared calendar and come an hour later and then have everything there ready to go. This stuff takes time. Again, it takes a culture of care that people should not just like leave places willy-nilly, but actually, take care of them. Leads to a lot of really cool stuff, because there's things that literally we could have never imagined. Like someone came and just built an entire new wooden structure, or built like a solar data center. And I would never think, oh, we should build a solar data center. But, someone did, and someone had the energy and agency to go do that, which is awesome. The third principle is default healthy. So we try to think of health as kind of like just a core part of the infrastructure. It's not just like a nice to have. So there's obviously like daily movement, there's access to good food. We've had a bunch of we had like Muay Thai classes in Thailand and things like that. So it usually like fits the vibe wherever we are. And the key insight there is like feeling good is a core part of flourishing. And when people flourish, their ideas do as well. So I think that's just, relatively obvious. And then the last one is we have a focus on multi-generationality. Basically, people bring their kids, people bring their families, their parents, their grandparents, and it has kind of a village vibe to it. And I think this is really critical. One, because a lot of the world's most interesting thinkers have kids and families, and they can't just like leave them for a month. So we get a lot of amazing people who are excited to come finally be able to go somewhere that they find interesting and also bring their families. And two, I find it just changes the vibe, like it's hard for it to be like a tech bro echo chamber when there's like cute kids running around, and I think it's just important. Like children are amazing. Yes, they make it slightly more difficult. Sometimes they're loud in a lecture and we have to figure out what to do there. But all in all, I think it's just like a massive, massive value add. So yeah, that's how we think about that stuff.
And I guess like the multi-generational element is representative of society in general. It's actually more realistic than if it
100%. And I think that's like a key differentiator there between us and maybe like Vitalik has a line that's basically, a 2-day conference is a break from your life, but a 2-month thing becomes your life, and it's long enough. You actually have to like figure out how to live in that context. And I think that's a key part of it, which is a 1-month thing, even it just becomes a much closer reflection of what society actually is, right? Versus like a 1 or 2 day event.
Yeah, no, for sure. I remember this was a 1 or 2, well, it was a 3-day event, but the first kind of network state thing that I engaged with in person was Network Society Camp, which was just outside of Austin. And I was expecting, I go to a lot of crypto things, I thought it was going to be kind of like tech bro fest. It wasn't. There was a lot of families. And I remember just being taken aback because there was a lot of conversations around what does schooling look like in a network state, and things that I don't think would have been brought up unless there was the presence of families. There was also some conversation about how do we build for the elderly. There's a lot of different takes that come into the conversation when you bring in the multi-generational aspect.
I think that's it. And it points at something I think very important, which is just representation matters a lot. And this goes for kind of general plurality. If you want to build a diverse functioning society, you should have, different perspectives in the room related to like all of the different areas of society that you care about. And kids are definitely one of those. They're like a really big, group, a very important group that's about to inherit everything that we're clumsily trying to create. So I think that's a big one. I'm curious from your perspective, because you've spoken to and been at a bunch of these things. What's your take on the different cultures, the different ways of approaching these things, and not just Edge, but kind of all across the board?
In different projects? I feel like certain projects focus on it more and they would benefit from collaboration with other projects that don't. I think this was a theme that came out of my time at Network School and was discussed quite a lot at the Network State Conference, about this idea of layer ones and layer twos collaborating to create different things. And I know when I was at Network School, which I would consider a layer one, they really benefited from people creating the layer twos within the community to create some kind of culture, because without it, it was, yes, we were just occupying like a luxury hotel at the end of the day. So I feel like collaboration within these different projects is definitely important, because I really don't think a single kind of board or group of people, core team, can focus on all elements. Although saying that, this brings me to my next question. I know that you have been kind of engaging in more pop-up experiences, but you are thinking about more long-term residencies, if I'm correct in thinking that. I know that Esmeralda, you're collaborating with them, obviously, like long-term to create a city near Healdsburg. And then I think in Bhutan, you're thinking about doing a residency. How is the longer-term element impacting how you approach these things for like 2 months?
Yeah, so it's definitely affecting our thinking. So I would say something that happened in the last 6 to 12 months in this, movement is that there has been a lot more focus on permanent hubs and permanence as a kind of a goal or an end state to these projects. And when I think about what we're doing and the pop-up villages, pop-up cities that we do, I do see them as, a step towards kind of a network of hubs around the world, some of which will be temporary, will kind of happen once or twice a year, some of which will be permanent, over the next couple of decades. And these pop-ups are almost incubators of the communities that will go on to live there, or at least help make them happen in some way. The way that that vision is impacting what we do now is that it definitely changes where we choose to do pop-ups. So it's, we've always cared about, obviously, it needs to be in like an interesting place that people want to go to. It needs to have some kind of local community partnership, which are usually very in-depth. There needs to be some reason why we're going there. But more and more, the important thing is what is actually the long-term benefit to us and to the place, and can we actually have kind of meaningful partnerships with people there and with organizations and institutions there. So, for example, as we're now starting to scout in India for the Edge City India, which we'll do in Q4 of this year, there's probably, honestly, there's like 30 viable locations. And one of the deciding factors will be where can we figure out kind of like an interesting partnership with a local, like long-term real estate project. We obviously always have many local partners, and we're in touch with like the local governments there, the like innovation agency and all of that stuff. But it's more about like, where is there kind of a physical place that we can actually benefit through the work that we do, and over time kind of create a longer term partnership like we've done in Esmeralda, and like we're starting to do more in Bhutan as well. So yeah, that's how we think about that. I mean, I think in the long run, it's just about creating a network where we can just have learnings from different sides of the, of the world, inform how things are done in other places and vice versa, and just have this kind of amazing global community,
Yeah, no, definitely. The integration of local communities actually brings me on to another point, another question, because you guys do the pop-ups in kind of existing villages. How do you go about kind of integrating local community? Because I feel like in other projects that I've seen or have been proposed, it's been difficult, right, to integrate local populations in a way that is meaningful and where they are actually kind of in the fabric rather than just, I don't know, providing some of the kind of services and stuff like that. How do you go about doing that in your projects?
Yeah, definitely. It takes a lot of work. It's really not something trivial, and it's not something we take for granted. For us, it starts with finding really strong local partnerships with communities or organizations or institutions that already have a lot of trust, and who see the value in bringing something like what we do to their community, and who are willing to, get on the phone with us and just understand what exactly it is we're doing, because it's still incredibly confusing and illegible to a lot of people. It's like, wait, you're coming for a month. Like, what are your intentions here? Is it like a corporate retreat? Is it a conference? So how many people? 500, 1,000? That's insane, So we get a lot of questions like that. I'll just give you examples to illustrate the point. So we just did a pop-up city in Patagonia, in Argentina, in a town called San Martín de los Andes. And it's like a beautiful mountain town. It's about an hour flight from Buenos Aires. And when we started, the reason we got connected there is because a friend of ours, Cello, runs kind of the biggest crypto startup, or one of the biggest success stories out of Argentina. It's called Lemon. And he's from there, and he knows a lot of people there. And that's actually where his startup started. And that's often how these things begin. You have a conversation with someone, and we said, hey, Cello, we're looking at doing something in Argentina. Where do you think we should do it? And he's like, you have to do San Martin. I'm going to introduce you to everyone there. Like, just have a conversation with them. And so he introduced us to a local cooperative called Bitkatesma. And they, like, from the beginning, they just instantly got what we were trying to do. They were following up with us, which is actually kind of rare. Usually we have to kind of drive the conversation. They were like, guys, when's it happening? When are you coming? They were like very keen. And I think the thing they were most excited about was that we were going to bring, 500 incredible builders and thinkers and researchers and just like cool people to their town for a month, and especially doing it during a off season. And so they were incredibly excited. And once you have a local kind of champion like that excited, then they introduced us literally to like every single restaurant owner. We got them all onboarded onto crypto, tons of hotels, Airbnbs, we got free venues and stuff like that, because, and we even had the state that town is in is called Neuquén. We had the innovation agency of that state get incredibly involved, because again, they're like, wait a second. So you're saying all of these people from Silicon Valley, from around the world, who are building amazing startups are going to come to our town for a month? Like, what? Like, what else do you need? Do you need visas? Do you need like, etc.? So maybe that was a bit, tail end of the distribution in like the positive direction in terms of how happy and excited they were. It's not always like that, obviously. Sometimes people just don't care. They're like, whatever. We don't need startups. We don't need anything, So that's how it is in California, actually, funny enough. It's a bit more NIMBY there, but yeah, usually again, it just takes work. You have to like fly, go there, actually spend time there, meet people, have dinner with them, show that you're actually like a genuine, thoughtful, interesting person. Like we did an event in Turkey 3 years ago, and the people we collaborated with there, we're still constantly in touch, purely on like a friend basis, because we got so close from doing it together that they're always checking in. They're like, oh, when can you come back to Turkey? And we're like, yeah, we'd love to. We just don't have time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that stuff can be difficult, but it's also some of the more like meaningful connection that comes out of this whole thing.
Okay. That's really interesting. It's funny that you brought up that in California, they're a bit more NIMBY, because like when I was in Healdsburg, granted, I was there for like 3 days because it was like at the tail end of the trip that I was already doing. But I did get the sense that the local residents of Healdsburg, they were happy for the thing to be there, but they weren't super like interested. And I do wonder, like in these more in there, but also in kind of San Martin, you said that you talked to kind of local restaurant owners and onboarded them to crypto. Did you find that they actually were interested in kind of the conferences and like, not conferences, but, like the conversations, and did they engage with some of the activations that were happening in the communities that you brought?
Yeah, so the way that we've tried a few different ways of doing this, and the challenge is that you obviously want local people to be to participate if they want to, and at the same time, we have a relatively strict application process for normal attendees, and so we kind of have to also abide by that. And so the balance that we've struck is basically having one day of the week that's open to locals. So people can come and experience programming, they can host sessions and things like that. In Patagonia, so this was Wednesday, in Patagonia, we had a local demo day. And what's amazing about that is that we had people coming and talking, kind of presenting 10-minute demos on a new piece of like farming equipment that they had created, the prior year or things like that. And so it's super different to the AI startups or whatever that are presenting otherwise. But two of the locals actually got investment funding from our community. So people were going to the local demo days. They were engaging, there was like translators there. Some people spoke in English. A lot of it was in Spanish. And there was actually like outcomes from it, right? It wasn't just theater. Like people actually really loved that side of the event. So yeah, I think, we definitely try and improve that over time. It's difficult, or it's not difficult. It's just something that requires thoughtfulness and work,
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a really good approach, especially like the fact that you're having kind of demo days and allowing kind of local talent to kind of show what they're working on as well. Just on the point of kind of a strict application, and I mean, this is a general thing that I've noticed in some of these projects. They are strict applications. They can be kind of appealing in the fee structure to a certain demographic or a certain economic bracket, which I think has been part of the external criticism of, and you pointed that out at the beginning of the conversation, that it does appeal to like a certain economic bracket to engage in those things. I mean, at the beginning of this conversation, you said that, yes, that correct me if I'm wrong, that some of that is a benefit. But do you see a world where these further down the line, these communities can be a bit more accessible to people who maybe in the early days wouldn't have been able to access it? Or do you think that that's not what these are here for, and actually this is kind of more of an experimentation, and therefore, and it will give way to a certain framework that will be different and serve a different purpose? That was quite a long question. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I think maybe I might have said something that didn't fully represent my opinions on this. I definitely don't think it's a good thing that these are like expensive events and therefore are exclusive just by nature of money. And like specifically, we care a lot about this. I think 25%, over a quarter of the people that come to Edge are on some kind of discount or scholarship, and some of them are just like fully comped, and that's something we care about a lot. So no, I definitely don't see that as a feature. I think it's a bug, but there are just the realities of like, we structure our events through a nonprofit. We're not trying to make money, or like, we're not trying to, make institutional money in the long run on the events themselves. So the events are structured to break even with like a small margin for like a small margin of error. And what that means is that we have the expenses of the event, and we have to make them up through tickets or sponsorships or partnerships. And so if there are people who can't afford it, we have like a very robust scholarship system. We give discounts. People can volunteer. People get a free ticket if they volunteer 40 hours a week. And that sounds like a lot, but a lot of the time it's just like, you're kind of just hanging out at the events anyway. Like you're doing the stuff you would want to be doing regardless. You're just in a bit more of like your mind is thinking more about like making sure things are flowing versus, just being fully, doing whatever you want. So that's how we've structured it. But yeah, it's difficult. I mean, California, for example, where we do one of our flagship events, it's called Edge Esmeralda. It's in June. It's just an expensive place, like we try and price the tickets very reasonably, and then it costs a ton of money to stay there because the Airbnbs are expensive, the housing's hard, whatever. So yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is like, it's so funny, the different lenses that people have, because I will just as often hear like, oh my God, Edge is so expensive, la la la, compared to like a crypto conference, which is free usually, which just says more about that industry than anything. As I'll also often hear like, oh my God, it's so cheap, you're like totally underpricing it, because some people just used to going to TED or Summit and it costs 10 grand for like a day or 2 days. And so they're like, wait, it's only 2K for a month? Are you crazy? Like, what's the deal, And obviously that's just the ticket. It costs more with accommodation and stuff. But yeah, I think it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. And we're just trying to like just stay sustainable for a bit while we figure out the like long-term sustainability through, the startups that are coming through the network, the real estate potential play, and all of that kind of stuff.
No, I mean, from my engagement with Edge, I do think that you guys really approach it in a good way. Definitely compared to kind of other projects. But that being said, I mean, I feel like this is kind of there's a lot of criticisms of the movement, and that is one of them. And I think, by the way, I think it's like a very valid criticism. And I think I've seen a couple things that feel a little bit more elitist, and it's just, that's fine. That's going to appeal to a very certain type of person. It's not my thing. And it's whatever. Like, I'll go and give a talk there, but I don't need to make that my like primary community. And also I understand, like, I have friends who are artists, who are activists, who just like look at something like this and they're just like, why on earth would I spend that money to be there for a month, So I get it. I see all potential
perspectives on this, and I have empathy or like sympathy for all of them.
I guess when anything's new, there are a lot of kind of things that need to be discussed and like approached. And I would imagine as well, if everyone's talking about kind of critical mass and reaching critical mass, especially with like some of these more kind of permanent locations. And I feel like maybe that might be something that's addressed with more people engaging. It's like the economies of scale and all that kind of stuff. Maybe. I don't know how it will pan out, but it is an interesting kind of element to think about. We're coming close to the end of the time. Before you go, I wanted to kind of ask my final question, which is, what role do you see Edge playing in the wider network state and generally technology ecosystem?
Yeah, I think what we've done so far for the network state movement is really demonstrate the fact that you do need to start with real IRL gatherings that bring people together so that they actually have a chance to like meet and connect and form the bonds that will allow for the bigger vision to become reality. Because I think that, when the book first came out, it painted a picture where people would like meet online and then they would like buy a land and then move in together. And I think what it missed was just the fact that you actually have to like bring people together, first, and build that culture and build kind of like a vibe that people can opt into. So I think we've done that pretty successfully. I think we'll also just keep demonstrating what like really good versions of these things can look like and just get really, really good at those. So that's, I think, the role that we're playing currently. And then something we're seeing as well is that we've already had a few pretty big startup hits and projects that came out of Edge. And I think a couple that we can point at and be like, wow, that actually would not be a thing unless they came to us and through us. And that feels really good. That feels very exciting. And I think that's maybe something that we can push the industry towards a bit more as well, of like, these are not just fun places to spend time. These are also interesting places for new projects to come out of and get built, and get incubated. And that also touches on the second part of your question around what role can these things play for like technology and like society as a whole. And my sense is that there will be things that will come out of these spaces that could not have come out of like a Y Combinator or something, or like a B2B SaaS accelerator, because it's just a very different context. You have a lot of high agency people living together for an extended period of time. And so there's just like a different milieu from which ideas can spawn. Maybe they're not going to be, printing unicorns like YC does, but it, I think, will lead to just like very novel ideas in the minds of people who are spending time in those places.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I feel like some of the things that I have seen within the workshops as part of these gatherings, they've been pretty novel. And I don't know whether they ended up being made into a business or anything, but just the fact that people are around each other for like extended periods of time just seems to be beneficial on that front. They've got the space, they've got the time to kind of collaborate and create. And it's great that you're kind of creating these environments. Well, I'm going to let you go. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about all this.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and I hope where's your next one's the Healdsburg, right? The Edge Esmeralda. I'm hoping that I'll get to pop in. I'm not sure if I will be able to, but thank you, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you so much. You too. Take care.